Something that I really hope for games to deliver is their ability to apply proper closure to the main story. Implementing a final battle of sorts to the story offers the player more satisfaction upon completion and should make you feel like everything you have learned up to this point all comes to play at this very moment. Final bosses are something that I personally am always looking forward to while playing a game, and it is especially disappointing when the gameplay is extremely good, but the final boss ends up being very lacking. Luckily, all the games on this list have good gameplay, so we don't have to worry about that. Also, just wanted to mention that there will be lots of spoilers in this video, so prepare yourself for that before you watch. Here are my top 10 final bosses of the 2021.
Let's get this over with.
Now this game is probably the most recent bunch of games that I've completed, but I think it's good enough for me to have it on this list anyway. The Ori series are Metroidvania style games that I personally enjoyed a little more than Hollow Knight. That doesn't mean that I don't appreciate it though. I mean, hell, Ori was probably heavily inspired by Hollow Knight anyways. It just looks like a better game visually. But that alone was enough for me to favor this game over any of its predecessors. The final boss of Ori and the Will of the Wisp is Shriek, a battle that was heavily foreshadowed throughout the entirety of the game, and I'm gonna be honest, I actually didn't expect her to be the final boss despite her overall portrayal as the main antagonist, especially with that tragic backstory that was given to us around the middle of the story. I figured the game might hit us with a true villain trope yet again and made Shriek have a change in heart. But anyways, speaking of her backstory, Shriek was an owl just like Kuo from the first game, born mutated to the decay in the Silent Woods. Since her parents lay deceased while she was born, she attempted to find warmth with the other owls, but ends up being rejected due to her deformities. As a result, Shriek grew up shunning the light and eventually led her to try and kill Ori and Ku to stop them from saving Yuan. As for the boss fight itself, I found it to be a perfect testament for the majority of skills you acquired throughout the entire game, and it was probably the best fight in the entire game to be honest. The boss fights in this game being considered something new since the first game didn't really have any boss fights at all. The fight starts off with you in a regular battle phase, which pretty much has you dodging, weaving, and punishing as you'd expect. Then it kicks on to a lawn escape segment, which occurs in a lot of fights in this game actually. And then finally, the final segment of the fight, which gets kinda crazy. While Shriek does get a bit harder, she eventually destroys the entire ground and forces you to fight mid-air the entire time until you finish the fight. It requires you to keep your head up the entire time while constantly bashing on projectiles to avoid hitting the ground, and I'm just glad dying during this phase doesn't force you all the way back to the very beginning, because if that was so, this boss fight would be very hard. After the battle, Shriek lands in the very first place she hatched in, with the remnants of her family. While experiencing warmth for the very first time, she eventually succumbs to the decay. Definitely a very solid and emotional climax for a game that would have been great even without such an amazing story.
Let's get this over with.
Now before I mention anything about this fight, I just want to let you know that the only Final Fantasy games that I have fully completed are Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy XIII, 13-2, and 13 Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Final Fantasy 15. And Dirge of Cerberus if you want to count that one. And out of all the main titles, this was definitely the best final boss out of them all. Excluding one, but we'll get to that later. Final Fantasy XIII Lightning Returns was a bit underappreciated due to the fact that it's a runner-up to the legacy of the 13 series, which didn't really have the most positive rep surrounding it. Regardless of what people may think of the series, there's nothing stopping me from admiring this fight whatsoever. The final boss of this game is against a god named Bunavelsa, who is, I'm gonna try to make this seem as simple as possible, the lead deity of the 13's universe. Because of a series of unfortunate events that occurred in the previous game, the world ended up raveled in chaos. Chaos being a dangerous form of matter that resides in the realm of Valhalla, or the Unseen Realm, and which also happens to be placed inside the hearts of every human being in existence by the goddess Etro. Since Bunavelsa couldn't see or understand the chaos, he saw this event as a chance to finally create his own world, in which he would have full control over all of humanity, molding them into puppets with a lack of free will. In an attempt to accomplish this, Bunavelsa recruits Lightning as a Soul Reaver to acquire as many souls as possible in the final 13 days before the end of the world, so that they may be transferred to an ark in which the remaining souls would be purified before they enter the new world. During his confrontation with Lightning at the end of the game, since Lightning slowly gained back her true emotions through the likes of a character named Luna, who is basically Lightning's hidden emotions incarnate, who followed her throughout the entire game. Lightning rejects Benevel's plan for the new world and decides that humanity doesn't need a god to rule over them. The battle consists of 4 phases, the first of which has him just sitting in the center of his checkered arena and cast a bunch of spells on you. In the second phase, he turns around revealing his second face and begins to move around the arena, all while acquiring a variety of new attacks that mostly still consist of spells. In the third phase, he reverts back to his original face, but this time he starts using his weapon for most of his attacks. He also has a super move during this phase called Hypernova, which kinda can be referenced back to the likes of Sephiroth's Supernova from Final Fantasy VII, at least for that name being involved. The fourth and last phase of this fight can either be the easiest or the hardest depending on how you approach it. Benevelza lifts up half of the battlefield and launches his final assault on Lightning. During this phase, he will take little to no damage whatsoever, so your main goal is to stagger him, but once you stagger him, the fight is pretty much over, to be honest. Also, the soundtrack changes during this phase as well, which is kind of weird considering it's a 13-minute track, yet this phase can probably be done in like 2 to 3 minutes on a first attempt. Hell, I don't even think the entire battle would last 13 minutes now that I'm thinking about it. Anyways, in the end, Lightning manages to defeat him and saves Hope from being used as his vessel. However, the whole game comes together at the end to finish him off once and for all. This, in my opinion, was definitely a solid ending to the series, and I do think this fight deserves a lot more recognition than what it gets. Also, I really dig Benevelza's design. It's definitely one of the sickest or unique character designs I've seen in a while. Overall, amazing fight.
Let's get this over with.
Ah yes, I bet you are already assuming this list would consist of multiple scenarios in which you're put against God himself, or herself in this case. Jubilees is actually one of the first bosses that comes to my head whenever I think of final bosses in video games, quote unquote. I'm not sure why, but I think it has something to do with the fact that you're fighting the literal creator in a giant red floating orb in space, all while playing as a sexy gun-wielding, hair-swinging witch that summons demons to do her bidding, all while striking a pose. Real talk though, this fight is actually really good. It may not be the hardest, but it still aesthetically screams final boss. Jubilees, while not being the main antagonist of the game, is a major antagonistic force surrounding the likes of Baldur, who is actually the game's main villain. What Baldur was trying to do was essentially bait his daughter Cereza, which is Bayonetta's real name, into giving up the power of the left eye, which was half of the power gifted to humans long ago by the god of chaos Aesir, along with the right eye, in which Baldur possesses himself. Both eyes were needed to awaken Jubilees, the ruler of Paradiso, or Heaven in the Bayonetta universe. After Baldur is seemingly defeated, the left eye awakens inside Bayonetta, and Baldur is revealed to have survived. He takes Bayo to the top of Jubilees' statue where she is imprisoned, and launches both of them to space to resurrect the creator. All seemed lost until John, Bayo's unborn sister, who was previously under Baldur's control throughout the entirety of the game, comes to the rescue and rides a goddamn motorcycle to space in an attempt to save her sister. She manages to get to her in time and pulls Bayonetta out of Jubilees' left eye. However, the deity is still resurrected, albeit at half of his intended power, and the battle then commences. As mentioned earlier, the battle takes place in a giant red sphere, at least for the most part. She attacks mainly with her hair, which consists of weird angelic looking faces that shoot different elements at you, and with her own fists, and after some time, Jubilees will start changing the battlefield into fire, ice, and then wind, which is a reference to the previous bosses you fought earlier who possess the same elements. She also has a galaxy looking attack that turns you into a child if you're hit by it. Like, the hell is this shit, man? Not only that, but one of her attacks, that black hole looking thingy, is a potential insta-kill if you fall into it. But I mean, it has a lot of startups, so as long as you prep Path within, you should be good. Once the battle is finished, supposedly with the help of John, Bayo summons the Great Queen Sheba, the ruler of Inferno, or Hell, with Big Bang Force, launches Jubilees' soul across the solar system and into the sun, with her remains left to collapse into the earth. The credits roll, and then that's pretty much it. Okay, but wait, there's actually one more thing. So before the game actually ends, John reveals herself to have survived, and together, her and Bayonetta destroy all that remains of Jubilees' physical body before it crash lands into Earth. This was a nice little feature added to the endgame, and it really wants to tell you that this bitch is gone for good after this. Definitely a very memorable final boss fight, and even with Bayo 3 on the horizon, I still have high hopes that Platinum will make an even greater final boss than this.
Let's get this over with.
Persona 5 was the very first title I played from the series, and to be honest, I didn't really expect to like it as much as I did. I kind of looked at the game a lot before I even considered purchasing it, and it still didn't catch my attention that much, to be honest. But eventually, I came across a Black Friday sale during the year of its release, and I decided to cop it and see if the hype was real, and goddamn, was this game a treat. Despite it being very long, I think most of the game, with the exception of some forgettable and slow segments, has pretty good pacing of story and definitely caters to the character's development. But let's get into the actual boss for this list before I start reviewing the game as a whole. The final boss of the base game of Persona 5 is Yaldabaoth, a god who portrayed or disguised himself as Igor throughout the entire game to put both Joker and Akechi into a game of sorts as a means to test humanity by seeing if either one of them can settle the Shido conspiracy, Shido being the main antagonist of most of the core game's plot up until the endgame. If Joker won, humanity would have proven itself capable of reform, and if Akechi won, then they would have to set themselves up for destruction. Little did they both know, Yaldabaoth had rigged the entire game from the start, because when the Phantom Thieves had finally won, he ended up forcing humanity to forget that they even existed in the first place, which essentially meant that they were going to be erased from existence, and with that being done, Yaldabaoth can go through with his real plan: complete rule over humanity as a means to solve the mass's sheer and utter destructiveness. He believes this mainly due to the fact that Yaldabaoth is essentially humanity's collective treasure, and that whatever he thinks is best for humanity is what humanity actually desires. In reality, he is only portraying himself as such. But even when the Phantom Thieves are seemingly defeated, after Lavenza is restored to reform herself and the original Igor is released from prison, it turns out the people that have been erased from cognition are not actually truly gone, and that a strong bond can bring them back to reality. Realizing this, Joker bonded back with the rest of the thieves trapped in the Velvet Room and then proceeded to a final confrontation with the malevolent god. Before you even get to Yaldabaoth, you have to fight the four archangels: Uriel, Raphael, Gabriel, and Michael, all in which are bosses in their own respective nature. The toughest one probably being Michael, as he is the last one you face before the real final battle begins. Once the game enters the Grail Shrine, they come across Yaldabaoth's sealed form yet again, which is the Holy Grail, and only this time, you're able to actually damage him, at the Morgana Castellans connecting him to the masses. This part of the final battle can sort of be considered easy, but he still has attacks that can devastate a good chunk of your team if you're not careful, and with little effort, you can be done with this quicker than most boss fights. But what I'm really trying to talk about is his final phase, which is Yaldabaoth's true form. This form screams final boss, and it definitely plays out as one. This battle is over 30 minutes long in itself, probably even longer than that to be honest, and it is not a breeze to run through by any means. Attacking him alone won't really do anything. Instead, you have to attack his appendages, all in which represent the 7 deadly sins: lust, vanity, gluttony, wrath, greed, envy, and pride. He sends these out in order from which you fought all the game's previous bosses, each representing their own respective sin. Each one of these appendages has a unique ability ready to screw you over at any moment, so going through this fight for the first time will definitely get the adrenaline going, but if that's not enough, he also has an ultimate attack once he's low on HP, which can just straight up kill your entire team if you don't damage him enough to weaken it. Dying during this fight would mean that you have to restart from the Holy Grail fight, and so I'm extremely glad I managed to get by this fight on the first go, otherwise my experience would have probably been hindered with this boss. But even then, I still appreciate for how well it was set up, along with it being an amazing climax to an amazing story. And let's not forget that amazing finisher at the end of this battle.
Be gone.
Preposterous! You dare wrong the people's wishes!
Let's get this over with.
Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now keep in mind, I've never played the original Final Fantasy VII, so if the fight in that game was better than this, then it must have been a damn good fight, because the Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII Remaster was everything I expected from this game's ending, and even more so considering that this is only part 1 of what looks to be 3. During the battle with the Arbiter of Fate, the entire time I was thinking, where's Sephiroth? He literally told Cloud that he'd be waiting on the other side, but instead of that, I'm fighting a God of War sized level of a boss that looks like it was a cliche attempt to give off that feeling of a final boss, and you think I'm gonna accept this as an ending? Hell no! Where's Sephiroth? I need Sephiroth! Where's Sephiroth? This cannot be a Final Fantasy VII Remake without a Sephiroth fight! Come on, Sephiroth! I need— oh, there he is! He was just waiting in the background preparing his iconic music and his celebrity entrance. Well played, Sephiroth. You had me going there for a second. Okay, but real talk, the Arbiter fight was visually stunning. Hell, the entire game was visually stunning, so I'd expect nothing less from the final battle. I just hated how it made you go through all those phases again if you died on the Bahamut section, which by the way, looked badass as hell. But the actual final battle of this game is of course with Sephiroth, and goddamn did I love it so much. I haven't even played Final Fantasy VII back in the days, and even I was freaking out knowing that I was about to fight freaking Sephiroth on next-gen graphics, 1080p, 4K, 1820 by 1460 resolution, along with an improved version of Final Fantasy XV's battle system, which, if y'all didn't know, was a good idea executed poorly due to how mindless it was. Final Fantasy VII Remake fixes all the issues that 15's battle system had and actually makes you think before you attack. Now don't get me wrong, I still think the game is kinda easy, but not to the level of dying over 99 times and still not getting a game over because you maxed out on Phoenix Downs. I think the only part of the game that could be comparable to 15's difficulty is the Rufus boss fight, because even though the game tried so hard to get me to parry in this fight, it just wasn't necessary. Even then, the change in pace of combat in this game really made the boss fight stand out more, and it is especially noticeable here in this fight. This is without a doubt the best fight in the entire game, with the runner-ups being Reno and Rude's fight and the Genova Dreamweaver fight. Mostly because of the music, but I still think it was a solid fight. It's just everything I expected from a Sephiroth encounter from the remake, and if you want to tell me, well, it could have been better, then that's fine, because I can just imagine the shit they're about to pull off with the next titles. I especially love how the music gets more and more intense as you progress more and more through the fight, and then eventually the game just hits you with the truly astonishing. Also, the fact that your party members slowly come back before Sephiroth reaches his final phase is cool as hell. The difficulty in this fight seemed fair as well. He doesn't really move much the entire time except when he's executing attacks here and there, but you're still gonna find yourself in situations where you have to heal your entire party due to the area effect of most of his attacks. He also has a final attack of sorts which seemingly puts you on a time limit to finish the fight, but I've never actually seen people die from this since he activates it with like 10 HP left. Also, I completely forgot to mention the background behind this boss. The Sephiroth you actually fight in this game is not the same Sephiroth from the original game. Well, it is, but it isn't. It's the original Sephiroth somehow managed to time travel to the past to alter the events of the past that led to his defeat by taking control of the Whispers after the party managed to defeat the Arbiter. The Whispers being those shadowy things that are trying really hard to make sure everything from the original game happens as where they intended to. At the end of the game, Sephiroth appears to have gained control of these things, already making him a lot more powerful than he was before. This would also imply that he has control over fate itself, but we really don't know for sure how this is all going to go down until the future titles come out. Again, visuals amazing, music amazing, battle amazing, definitely a top 10 final boss in my book.
Let's get this over with.
I really had to think about this one before I put him this high on the list. Not only because the 5 previously mentioned fights are already as amazing as they are, but because I really adored most of the Ganon fights from other Zelda titles. All of them were good with the exception of Breath of the Wild's Ganon fight, which I'm still kind of disappointed in, by the way. Game's still good though. In the end, however, I decided to go with the final confrontation with the Ganondorf from Twilight Princess, and it's for many reasons that a lot of people who also love this game feel as well. First off, the build up to the fight was extremely intense. Hearing Ganon's theme get more and more intense as you ascend to the top of the castle already gave me chills even before the actual encounter. As for the encounter with him, this is actually the first time our characters meet this iteration of Ganon in person. Before, all we got was a backstory shown to us by the sages in the Gerudo Temple. They attempted an execution on him, but when that failed, and Ganon ended up killing one of the sages, he was then banished to the Twilight Realm while retaining the sword the sages attempted to kill him with. While in the Twilight Realm, Ganon managed to get a hold of one of the Twili, Zant, the main antagonist of the game, and used him as a means to conquer both Hyrule and the Twilight Realm by fusing both shadow and light to create darkness. Once Zant is defeated, Ganondorf is reborn, and all leads up to this point. A final confrontation with the true antagonist of the game settled in 4 phases of sheer epicness. First, we got the Puppet Zelda fight, which is pretty reminiscent to the first Ganon phase in Ocarina of Time, where he kinda just plays a deadly game of electric tennis with you, except this time, he's in Zelda's body. He only has 2 other attacks, but each one of them have the same startup animation, so you're required to react to the 2 moves that aren't the glowing tennis ball of death. The second phase is Beast Ganon, which makes you shift into your wolf form in order to see the direction he'll be coming from, and then pressing A once he gets close to you. Keep doing that, and the fight fight is pretty much as good as done. After this phase is where things start to get a little more serious. After Beast Ganon is defeated, he resorts back to his yellow spirit god form and attempts to destroy the castle. However, before doing so, Midna saves both Link and Zelda and sends them both to Hyrule Field while she attempts to hold off Ganon using a few shadows. However, Ganon ends up coming out of the destroyed castle victorious with a piece of Midna's fused shadow, implying that he killed her. Now filled with rage, Link is now out for blood, and at this very moment will stop at nothing to kill the Demon Lord for good. Now begins the third phase, which has you ride Epona as you chase down Ganon in a horseback fight in Hyrule Field while Zelda assists you with light arrows to stun him, leaving him open for an attack. But what I really want to get to talking about is the final duel with him. Ganon traps Link in an arena where both of them proceed in a fight to the death to decide the fate of Hyrule yet again. Now, if you take out the fact that you can cheese this fight with a fishing rod, this fight is actually really damn good. I really do appreciate the games that give you a proper one-on-one confrontation with the main baddie, rather than destroying his super ultra evolved god form that ends up being piss easy and a half-assed attempt to make an epic climax. That isn't a shot at Ocarina, by the way. There's just certain instances where the trope doesn't work if executed poorly, but there's almost ever a time where these type of confrontations fail. It's just you versus the Demon Lord in the flesh while the climatic music plays in the background. Also, let's not forget that finisher. This has got to be one of, if not the best finisher in the entire series, if you ignore the derpy face Ganon makes while being stabbed to death. Also, the way Ganon dies after the fight is rather shocking. We just get a glimpse of Zant snapping his neck and he just dies, still standing up with a Master Sword stuck inside his chest. This is the kind of stuff that I hope future Zeldas bring back, despite Breath of the Wild being as successful as it is, because the final fight in that game did not cut it.
Let's get this over with.
You know, it kind of saddens me how this game had to end with DLC instead of a sequel due to the lack of sales, but at the same time, I'm happy because the DLC ended up being everything I expected for a true ending to this game. Like, Christ's sake, the base game already had a crazy over-the-top ending, and these last 4 episodes just took everything even further. Right after the final battle in the base game, we are introduced to this new character going by the name Chakravartin, who claims himself to be the god of all mantra in the universe, as well as the conductor of all the events that occurred within the game's time span of over 12,000 years, mantra being the source of Asura and the rest of the gods' power. While first portraying himself as a benevolent being, Asura then realizes that he has been responsible for everything that has happened to the planet all this time, including the creation of the Goma, creatures that have been ravaging Gaia or the Earth for thousands of years, as well as the god's main opposing foe. After Asura kills Dios and destroys the source of the Goma, Vlitra, for good, Chakravartin asks Asura to become the Redeemer, or new god of the world, and reveals that everything that has happened was already under his intention. Obviously, this revelation pisses off Asura to an unstable degree and attempts to kill him. Unfortunately, both him and his stepbrother Yasha are nowhere near the power level of an all-powerful god. Disappointed, Chakravartin decides to dispose of Gaia and recreate a new one, something he has apparently been doing for eons. With only a few days left to the end of the world, Yasha decides to leave it all up to Asura to save it by giving the power of the 7 trillion souls the gods have gathered on over 12,000 years, as well as his own energy. That power given to him by Yasha allows him to absorb the massive beam of light shot by Chakravartin in an attempt to destroy the planet and transform into his most powerful form, Asura the Destructor, which scales bigger than the planet itself, by the way. He flies off toward Chakravartin in the distance, and then the final battle commences. Now, this game was notorious for being able to exemplify a cinematic anime fight rather than focus on the gameplay itself. One of the main reasons as to why I love this fight so much is for how it drifted more towards the interactive side and focused more on visual effects, because that's really what this entire game of Asura's Wrath is about, an interactive anime, albeit a damn good one at the very least. I mean, just look at this. The guy is literally plowing through giant planets and suns, all while trying to reach the giant golden Buddha surrounded by galaxies. This part alone just shows how much stronger Asura has become compared to his previous incarnations, as well as portray the devastating power of Chakravartin even at his dormant state. When Asura finally breaks through the statue, he is greeted by Chakravartin yet again in his pocket dimension called Event Horizon, and realizes that he is indeed powerful enough to become the next Redeemer. He then offers back his daughter, Mithra, as a reward for passing his trial, but is quickly rejected by Asura and claims that he will end his reign over the universe once and for all, which is probably the first moment in the entire game where Asura puts the fate of others over his daughter. After a death-defying battle, Asura manages to take down Chakravartin, forcing him into his final state, Chakravartin the Creator. who is powerful enough to break Asura's destructor arms with just one finger. This form is without a doubt the best fight in the entire game, and one of the very few that could actually be considered quite difficult if you don't play it off correctly. In this form, Chakravartin is extremely fast as he rolls around the white void arena shooting waves of grey mantra at Asura. And although I'm not too big of a fan of the quick time events in video games, the quick time events in this game just make the battle so much more interesting and epic and keep the pace of the battle at its peak. One thing that I thought was pretty interesting was the fact that this boss actually has quick time events of his own during the final cinematic. Not entirely sure why they decided to do this, but it's a nice little touch to portray the desperation of both characters as they are both on their last legs. Just as Asura is about to lay the final blow on him, Mithra, once again being freed from Chakravartin's grasp, stops Asura from doing so, knowing that if he did kill him, all the mantra would cease to exist, including Asura himself. But there was only one thing that Asura cared about throughout the entirety of the game, and that was the safety of his one and only daughter. He then proceeds to kill Chakravartin with one final punch, ending the god's tyranny over the universe once and for all. Asura then greets his daughter one last time, announcing that his wrath is finally gone before fading into the afterlife. Even though I would have rather had a full-on sequel to this game with improved gameplay, ending the story with such a huge banner of a final boss was more than enough for me to appreciate. This game is definitely a hidden gem. Though it had its flaws, it has so many legendary moments enough for me to just completely disregard everything wrong with the gameplay and just focus on the story and visuals. Ask anyone else as to why they liked Asura's Wrath and I guarantee you they'll give you the exact same reasoning. This is definitely a game I will never forget.
Let's get this over with.
First off, I just wanted to say, if you own a Switch and do not own a copy of Astral Chain, I can only assume hack and slash isn't your thing, because this is quite possibly one of Platinum's best works compared to that of even Bayonetta 2. It manages to be unique in so many aspects of combat, giving you so much more options than just dodge and hit. This is mainly possible through the likes of these things called the Legions, who are basically the enemies of the game, bounded by an astral chain emitted from a device called the Legatus, in which the heroes use as a means to fight off the Chimeras. Chimeras being interdimensional hostile forces who crash landed onto the Earth several decades prior to the events of the game, who forced the entire human race to resort to living on an artificial island called the Ark to avoid being redshifted, which is basically a plague emitting from the Chimeras' homeworld called the Astral Plane, that gradually mutates both humans and animals into mindless beasts. Since regular people can't see these things, humanity's last hope revolves around that of Neuron, a special police force led by a man named Joseph Calvert, the creator of the Legions. Through him, our two protagonists gain legions of their own and attempt to save humanity. The final boss of this game is basically a superpowered version of a legion undergoing the name Noah, being formed after Joseph, who ends up being the true villain at the end of the game, goes through with his plan to save humanity from extinction by fusing everyone into a singularity using the power of legionic fusion, a process in which was only deemed possible through the likes of the main protagonists due to the fact that they were both born during a redshift pandemic that altered their genetic code. He would accomplish this by cloning the protagonist's sister or brother, depending on the gender you pick at the beginning of the game, Akira, by fusing all the legionic fusions into one, forming Noah. By doing this, Yosef, along with the rest of humanity, would fuse with the astral plane and become gods to each their own, all while Noah acts as a sort of arc of evolution, who would have continued to grow had it not been stopped immediately. Kinda like Ganondorf from Twilight Princess, the build up to the ending was pretty amazing and might honestly be the best final segment of a Platinum title yet. Before you even get to Yosef, you have to deal with all the enemies infesting the ARI along with all the ravens and remaining chimeras before you even get to the apex of the facility. Even once you reach that point, the grind never stops. After the protagonist fends off a mentally deranged Akira, Yosef reveals his plans to both protagonists and sends out all 5 legions after them. Once all of this is finished, Noah finally appears as a massive titan that has you running for your life up until it decides to absorb you, allowing you to attack its core. This segment right here was really something else. It was definitely one of the most trippy segments of a game I've ever experienced, and it only got more crazy as the fight progressed. But after the core boss fight, Yosef is killed, and Akira, who was previously absorbed prior to Noah being formed, destroys the core, and Noah is seemingly defeated.
Hey, you're alive! Great. You really had me worried for a minute. Wait, where's Akira?
God damn it, Platinum, I just knew you wouldn't let me down with this. After the core boss fight, Noah comes out of nowhere in his final state, Noah Prime, and sets up the final battle by ascending both it and the player to the sky in an astral playground. This fight right here was absolutely insane. Even from a Platinum title, I didn't expect something to this degree, especially for a new IP. Noah Prime is the absolute perfect final boss for this game. It's an amalgamation of everything that you have fought throughout the entire game, except pumped to the next level. There's a reason as to why this game lets you stock up so much before this fight, because this fight is significantly more difficult than any other boss in the entire game, especially on ultimate difficulty. All of his attacks require you to utilize pretty much every single one of your legions to counteract properly, and the arena is constantly shifting throughout the fight as well. And if you thought the fight was already hard enough at the beginning, you'd be in for a surprise once he gets to around 25% of his HP, because in this form, called Final Noah Prime, he becomes a hell of a lot more fast, strong, and his openings become very tight as well. The arena even closes in on you eventually and begins shifting all over the place. Like, Jesus Christ, they really didn't have to go as hard as they did with this fight. If that wasn't enough, once you manage to bring him down to 0 HP, you perform a super cool looking finisher involving attacks with all your legions in an attempt to put him down for good. With Noah weakened, Akira, who is still a part of Noah, is now able to take hold of Noah for a brief amount of time, enough for the protagonist to deliver the final blow. Although the game does give you the option to refuse since the attack would also kill Akira, both choices end up with the same result. The only difference being that if you refuse, the Arrow Legion becomes sentient and does the job for you rather than finishing off with the Axe Legion. The game's credits then roll afterwards. This battle, or game per se, definitely sets a new standard for Platinum, and I'm extremely confident that the sequel to this game will deliver whenever it does release.
Let's get this over with.
Nanomachine, son!
I cannot fathom anyone who has played through this game and would still not have the audacity to put this guy on a top 10 or even top 5 boss fight list. There's just so many things it does right that it's almost impossible to not give it the recognition it deserves. Although Armstrong was a character who first made his appearance at the very end of the game, he probably has more character than anyone else in the game due to the fact that he managed to get more screen time and dialogue than them. The transformation he undergoes is ridiculous, not because of the sheer amount of strength he gains from doing so, but more so due to the fact that he decides to fight Raiden in a giant multi-billion-dollar Metal Gear first because... reasons? The fact that he takes advantage of the destroyed Metal Gear to absorb his nanomachines makes it seem like Armstrong was planning on using it for this purpose anyways, because I'm pretty sure he needs some sort of source to power up regardless. While empowered by the nanomachines, Armstrong becomes even more powerful than Raiden, a guy who suplexes 100-foot tall Metal Gears on a regular basis, which means, yeah, this guy means business. Speaking of which, regarding Armstrong's goal as the main antagonist of the game, he stood as the Colorado State Senator and eventually went on with his plan to take back America by becoming president. As a means to revive the war economy, he created ties with World Marshal and Desperado, two of the world's largest private military companies responsible for the supplementation of cybernetic body parts, and had them traffic children and place their brains into cybernetic head casings to have them undergo virtual military training. Raiden, however, discovers their plan and puts a stop to it by eliminating all the Desperado captains, Mistral, Monsoon, Sundowner, and Sam, all while having his fellow colleague Doctor retrieve the children's brains from World Marshal HQ. However, Armstrong wasn't done just yet. After Sundowner's defeat, he reveals to Raiden that Armstrong is planning on launching a plan called Operation Tecumseh, which involved the assassination of the US president during peace negotiations with Pakistan to ensure another war on terror and inevitably placing Armstrong as the new president of the United States. Raiden confronts him in Pakistan and is right away found to be outmatched by the sheer power of Armstrong's nanomachines, who even manages to break his high-frequency blade. Fortunately, just when all hope seems lost for Raiden, Blade Wolf, who was shown earlier to be out of commission, hands Raiden Sam's high-frequency Muramasa, which is stronger than Raiden's original high-frequency blade, and capable of damaging Armstrong. It is here that the final battle commences. This battle is without a doubt the hardest on this entire list, and for a damn good reason too. I can't even be the only one who freaked out when I saw that this guy had twice as much health as every other boss in the game. Most of his attacks are unblockable and require you to position yourself in specific areas, all while the entire area is on fire due to the sheer destructive power of Armstrong. Thank God the game rewards you with nano paste package for getting through that blade mode section. As a whole, I can't help but get chills every time I see or play through this fight for the influx of epicness being shoved into my eye sockets at every second, and the music just makes everything even better. This game's boss fights are definitely its strongest aspect, mostly because it creates a good cinematic experience with the lyrics kicking in on specific parts of the fights, giving off that huge epic factor that most games tend to fail at bringing nowadays. Once you bring him down to his last legs, Raiden manages to stab Armstrong with a blade and eventually cuts his chest deep enough for him to rip his heart out. After the fight, although Raiden constantly opposed all of Armstrong's plans, he took on a part of his ideals, which was to fight his own war and not to let any legalization get in the way of it. This was another thing I adored about this fight. Not just the fight itself, but the message it manages to pull through. Hell, Armstrong makes a lot of good points during his speeches while kicking Raiden's ass, and that he only wants to recreate America the way he feels is necessary. It's a battle of ideals and morality, and in the end, only the victor will see their dream come into fruition. Considering Raiden always fought to protect the weak, it'd be interesting to see how he approaches things now as a rogue soldier. Although this game was released 7 years ago, I'm still waiting for the long-awaited sequel it deserves. Now before we get to number 1, here are a few honorable mentions.
Okay. Let's dance.
No more eternal than that radiance of yours.
It's been a little over 15 years, and somehow, someway, this fight still manages to top literally every single final fight of every game that I have ever played. I don't even know where to begin to describe how great this fight is, and I'm not just talking about his final form, but the entirety of Xemnas' phases the second you enter through the door of no return. From the massive dragon to the aerial chase to his armored form and then finally his final phase. Now there's something I had just started to realize about the background of this fight, and it just makes everything so much more deep than it already is. At this point, Xemnas has already lost Kingdom Hearts ever since his defeat at the hands of Sora in the game on his first phase. The fights that occurred with Riku and Sora near the end all revolve around Xemnas trying his best to take down the people who foiled all his plans to create the artificial Kingdom Hearts through the likes of Sora's Keyblade. He has nothing left to live for and nowhere else to go. The most he can do is bring Sora and Riku down with him. Knowing all of this, as well as bringing out the fact that you are fighting with Riku, someone whom Sora had been searching for ever since the beginning of the first game, makes this boss fight feel like it's an actual climax, and that this, for sure, is the end. This is something that I wish every game did with their final encounters instead of just throwing something at you last second and giving it crazy visuals. In my opinion, although good graphics, visuals, and gameplay can make a good boss fight, if the setup is trash and the story that led up to the moment was bad, it just doesn't give off that optimized feeling of an endgame. This is why I kept describing the background of every fight on my list, for this very reason. Even with all the amazing setup and background, this fight gameplay wise is just perfect. I seriously can't think of anything wrong with this fight despite the occasional reaction command glitch that occurs in the remix versions of this game during the aerial barrage of attacks. There's no cheese, no gimmicks, no instant KOs, Just you versus the leader of Organization 13, who fights with 2 lightsabers, shoots beams from his wrist, and is constantly teleporting all over the arena while utilizing duplicates of himself. There's even one time where Xemnas binds Sora and the game forces you to play as Riku to save him before his HP defeats 0. And you bet your ass I didn't forget about that final attack of his that surrounds both Sora and Riku with a barrage of lasers and has you deflect them for over 30 seconds straight. After that, the fight is pretty much over. After a cool cinematic, just one final blow will be enough for you to finish the game right then and there. To this day, I am still waiting for a fight that will top this one, and I'm a little bit disappointed that Kingdom Hearts 3's final boss didn't hold up to this fight for as hyped up as it was. Don't get me wrong, I mean, the fight was still very good. I just wish it had a better build-up rather than just putting us into a battle frame 1 and calling it a day. Like, what the hell was the point of designing a world like Scala at Kylum and only using it as a boss arena? It just felt like wasted potential. We could have been giving some lore regarding Xehanort's past and the origins of the world. I mean, at least the DLC made up for it. Kinda. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this video. Once again, this was very, very hard to make considering there's a lot of fights out there that I thought had the potential to make this list as well. But in the end, I came down to a decision, and I'm definitely looking forward for future titles that have the potential to change this list. Until then, I wish you all a happy day.